everyone, welcome to week 10. Now we're going to talk a little bit about licenses. And before we do that, here's a little disclaimer that we're not lawyers. So, because licensing involves a lot of work and studies into the laws and how the text of the license should be written, there is actually a lot of, you know, background information on it, and all of what we're going to be showing you is our suggestions and informal tips from things we've learned over the years. So just be aware that if you ever need some legal advising or legal backing for your project for whatever reason, make sure you need to contact a lawyer, and what we're giving you here is just some pointers on where to start looking for information about licensing. Okay, so on today's agenda, we're going to keep it quite simple. For this part, we're going to look at the best practices for hardware licensing, and we're going to just use a simplified approach. Okay, so it's just enough to get you started and for you to learn where you have to look if you want to get more information and learn more about this topic. Okay, so overall and very simplistic, a hardware project often requires 2 or 3 licenses, right? So it needs one license for the software or firmware that runs on your project. If this is present, some hardware projects are analog, so they don't have any digital components to them. So here you wouldn't need a license for, obviously, for the software or firmware. You need a license for the artwork or documentation, and for the hardware design. So the files that show people how to build your hardware. And you need a license for the hardware itself. So basically, when, let's say, I take this printed circuit board and I solder everything on it and I make my hardware based on the designs, this thing needs a license as well, right? And we're going to see this a little bit more in detail. In practical terms, means that for designs and documents and the website of your project, you're going to use something like a Creative Commons license or copyright, something in those lines. For the software or firmware, you're probably going to back yourself up with all the already available licenses. GPL, here's a typo, GLP, but it's GPL. 3.0, the MIT license, Apache, and the many others that are available. The hardware, for the hardware itself, you're going to use licenses like the CERN Open Hardware License or the TAPR Open Hardware License or the SolderPad Hardware License. So there are many available tools to choose licenses. There is a website which is choosealicense.com, which is an online tool that has a series of questions where you can just click them and then it will more or less show you what is the best license for your project. There is also, and this is normally related to software and documentation and media. And there is the Creative Commons page, which has a choose a license tool that is also again for software and media. And unfortunately for hardware, this is not, there is no tool, let's say, that allows you to click into questions and then gives you out what is the best tool the best license that you can use for a project. But here are 2 links for the Open Source Hardware Association best practices page, where it shows not only best practices on contributing and making your open source hardware project, but also for licensing it. And also there is a very nice document that shows best practices for mechanical hardware. It's a GitHub page. And you should check that out. And if you know of any other tools, please make sure to follow this link at the bottom and put it more to our resources list. We would greatly appreciate that. So now a little bit, if you want to understand this a little bit more, instead of just plunking licenses on your project, we're gonna see a little bit in details that, or we're gonna see a little bit that open source licenses mainly fall into 2 categories: copyleft and permissive licenses. And copyleft is basically playing with the idea of copyright, of course. And basically the main idea behind these licenses is that they're trying to make sure that projects and their derivatives remain as open and free as possible. So they're very restrictive in terms of what the people who are making copies and making derivatives of an original project can do. so the idea is, for instance, for the GPL or the Creative Commons um, share alike licenses, is that whatever project derivative is coming out of a project that is licensed with either one of those, or let's say the software or the documentation, the derivatives have to be released under the same license. So they are in a way viral licenses because they kind of make sure that everything that comes downstream of the original project remains free and open and shared and licensed in the same way. While on the other hand, you have permissive licenses where, you know, an original project, let's say, is released under an MIT license, and then what happens under these licenses is that people that are making the derivative have the option to use the same license or not, and in the case of MIT, to share the code or not, let's say. So in practical terms, this means that basically you can take an open source project with a permissive license and make it closed. So you change something in the code, let's say for software, and then you make this a closed project, and you don't have to disclaim that this was based on a open source project. So in a way, they are more permissive, and they leave to the people who are deriving the work the freedom to choose what they want to do with the project. But in a way, they also, yeah, they are not making sure that everything that is derivated from your original open source project is going to remain open project. In the context of hardware, the CERN open hardware license and the TAPR open hardware license are both falling into the copyleft category, in terms that all the hardware that is then built should be released under the same license. There is a Wikipedia link with more information about them, and this pretty much concludes like this very short and brief intro. We thought that this was, well, not a topic that everybody wants to spend a lot of time on, but with the links that we shared here, you can learn a little bit more about this, so that at least you are comfortable enough to say, okay, I know that I want my project to be open source, and for the derivatives of it to be open source as well, so I need to choose, let's say, a GPL and a certain open source open hardware license together with a Creative Commons attribution share alike license. Okay? Thanks for your attention, and hopefully see you around in the chat and in all the other platforms. Bye bye.